Hi everyone, welcome to our screencast on substance use. Substance abuse is any unnecessary or improper use of chemical substances for non-medical purposes. This could be drugs, and there's a lot of different categories and types of drugs, and it could be alcohol as well. And we'll talk about some of those categories of drugs a little bit later. Understanding addiction and how addiction works. Tolerance is when the body needs more of a drug in order to achieve the effect that person was looking for. It could be, like we talked about with alcohol, to relax or to have fun or to achieve the euphoria for some drugs, more stimulants. And over time, if that person is using those drugs in order to achieve one of those effects, then they're going to have to use more and more. This can lead to a dependence. This can change their brain completely in the way it's wired and the way it works. And then when that person goes to try to stop using that substance, then they're going to experience withdrawal, which is when a person becomes dependent on that chemical or that substance, and then they're going to have some severe symptoms when they stop using that substance. Gateway drugs is using less harmful drugs, but the problem with this is it may lead to a future risk of using more dangerous and hard drugs. Gateway drugs could be alcohol, nicotine, which is in vapes, or tobacco like cigarettes, or cannabis use as well. And understanding addiction, again, synergistic effect. This is when the interaction of two or more medicines that result in a greater effect when they are taken together than when they're taken alone. So if you put two different substances together, they're going to have an increased effect on one another. The misuse of medicine, using a medicine in any other way than described on the package. If you ever get a prescription because you're sick, it's going to give you very explicit instructions on how to use those medications. And if you use them in any other way, like if you take too many, if you give them to somebody else, any other way than what was intended on that label, then that's misuse of medicine. Addiction can be physiological. The user has a chemical need for the drug because they've changed the way that their brain works so much that they have a need for the drug. And it can also be psychological. The person believes that they need the drug in order to feel good or to function. The physiological need will give rise to some of those withdrawal symptoms that we'll talk about in a little bit. Or no, symptoms of withdrawal include insomnia, severe headaches, vomiting, nervousness, chills, cramps. This sometimes is going to require medical intervention to prevent death. If that person has been using for such a long time or with such a high frequency that their body is so dependent on this substance that it really cannot function without it, then they're going to need medical intervention in order to stop using that drug safely. Other withdrawal symptoms, they can be very severe, as you can see here. Grand mal seizures that can result in coma or death, heart attack, stroke, suicidal thoughts, cravings, agitation, depression, panic attacks, hallucinations, anxiety, flu-like symptoms. I mean, you can look at all these and none of these are pleasant, right? None of these are things that anybody wants to experience. So it's better to stay away from the substances completely so you don't develop any sort of dependency physiologically or psychologically. Influences of people using these substances, like we talked about before with mental health in general, it could be nature or nurture. Is it biology or genes? Is it just the way the person is? Uh, Addiction definitely does have a genetic component to it. People are more predisposed to become addicted to substances just based on their genes and their DNA. And maybe environment plays a role too. Did that person have a chaotic home life? Did they suffer abuse? Did the parents use? And a lot of times people will pick up on their parents' cues. Peer influences, community, um, poor school achievement. So lots of different factors go into whether a person will use drugs or not. So the route of administration, the effect of the drug, early use, and availability and cost is going to influence the person's drug use, the amount and the type, and then mechanisms in the brain can trigger an addiction. So there's lots of different influences, and it's going to be different for every person, and it could potentially lead to an addiction if that person begins to use substances. Obviously, drug use is going to have a huge impact on every single aspect of health. Mental health, drugs are going to cloud reasoning and thinking. People that use methamphetamines experience paranoia. Users lose control of their behavior. People are desperate for money in order to obtain these drugs. And this is just a super small uh, a few examples of how drugs are going to impact somebody's mental health. There's so many other examples. Um, it affects the person's physical health. Addiction is going to affect every system in the body. You run the risk of developing HIV and hepatitis. It harms the user's vital organs majorly. And social health, obviously, too. It can ruin family and relationships. It can cause the person to be expelled from school and sports team, or if it's an adult, cause them to lose their job. Potential to become arrested because obviously using any one of these substances is illegal, and it can lead to becoming arrested, even if it's not illegal. If you think, well, if a person's over 21 and they're using alcohol, that's not illegal. But if they don't use it the correct way, if they're drinking too much and driving, if they're publicly intoxicated, those are all illegal. And so even if the drug itself or even if the substance itself is not illegal, it can give rise to illegal behaviors. So again, like we talked about with alcohol, it's best just to stay away to avoid any one of these negative ramifications. And there are so many better ways to deal with avoiding a problem or wanting to feel something. And those healthy coping mechanisms are going to be so much more beneficial to you and your health in the long run. So definitely stay away from these substances. And we'll talk more specifically about a couple of these substances in later videos or later activities. So let me know if you have any questions about this screencast, and I'll talk to you guys soon.